Hello and welcome. This is the Economic Times. My name is Ashutosh Sinha, and today we are here back again with you to talk about something which is so important and something that needs your attention. So if you're a company today and if you are generating so much of data today, what are some of those challenges in the governance of data? We'll be talking about that today. And I'll give you a little introduction to that. But before that, let me tell you what all is lined up and the experts who are there with us as well. So we'll have several experts there. Let me first introduce them to you. We have Ghai Pawani. He's COO at HSBC India. We have Suhail Ghai. He's EVP and CTO at Max Life Insurance. We have Sachin Dutta, Chief Operating Officer at Canara HSBC OBC Life Insurance. Atanu Roy, Group CIO at Biocon. Lalit Kalra, he's partner Cybersecurity at EY. Kashinath Mahapatra, CIO Enterprise at GMR Group. And Balaji Rao, Managing Director, India, Asia, and SAARC at Veritas. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining in and taking out the time for something that is so important in today's world and even more so important for tomorrow's world. So before we begin the discussion, before we begin the conversation, let me just give you a broad outline of what all we could be talking about. We'll have Balaji Rao joining for a small welcome address, followed by Lalit Kalra from EY, his partner Cybersecurity, who will be setting the context on what we'll be talking about. And he'll give a broad picture of that. And of course, the other gentlemen will come in with their experience across the years and from across industries to talk about what they see and how things could pan out. So if you are here with us, you wouldn't want to miss out on their expertise, on their wealth of experience, and you'd also want to share some of the key insights that they will share as we go along over the next 90 minutes. So let me first welcome and ask and request Mr. Balaji Rao for his inaugural address. Balaji, all yours.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here, and thank you for taking time out to be a part of this data, power of data, embracing flexible data governance webinar. As Veritas, we own about 87% of the Fortune 500's data, and we have been doing it for the last 2 decades, 80,000 plus global customers, 2,100 plus patents, and actually 500 of those patents have come from India, from Pune. We do a lot of work in India for all our global customers and Indian customers. So many of you here are well aware of what we do and also our customers. Once again, thank you for taking time out and for being here. I would say that a lot has happened. I've been here for 6 years in this space and running the India business and now the Africa as well as the SAARC business. And there's a lot that has happened in the last 6 years as trends that we see. We will talk about it in the next 90 minutes, I'm sure, but it's a fast changing world. We are seeing a lot of emphasis on digital, a lot of emphasis on transformation. And we are also seeing some serious adoption on the cloud side, much more accelerated thanks to the pandemic. It was always there, but even more accelerated. So I think today we have a wealth of expertise in this panel where we can talk about the complexities that this is bringing in, especially from a data governance standpoint, and regulations are getting to an all-time high from what we saw in the past. So these are, I would say, there is a perfect storm in the data space from the complexity and the challenge standpoint. But at the same time, we are seeing organizations, as Ashutosh mentioned, making meaningful use of this data and using data to actually drive their business and to drive differentiation in the respective marketplace and the verticals. So clearly data is the new oil. We need to mine the data. How do we protect the data? How do we govern the data? How do we ensure compliance around the same? I think we will have a lot of insight from the eminent panel that we have today. We have very senior people from pharma, banking and finance, and I would be very happy to add my thoughts and the trends that I see as we go along, as we speak to customers across verticals to share our experience as well. But first of all, thank you for taking time out. Thank you, Economic Times, for setting this up, and welcome to everybody on the panel and our audience as well who are hearing us live. Thank you, Ashutosh. Over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Balaji. It's very interesting that you've also referred to the audience, because we wait for questions from them. Some of them are already putting in questions. So in case you have any questions, please use the Q&A tab, and we would want to take your questions, and some of those will be addressed to the experts here as well. And in case you want, towards the end of the program, we'll also take some of your questions live. In case some of you want to join us, probably one or two of you, we would love if you can ask your questions to the experts here. So let me throw the ball and ask Lalit Kalra to come in. And there's one interesting thing that I was, as I was making my notes, I was reading and I was trying to understand the entire issue here. Lalit, of course, you'll give us a context, but one line caught my attention. Data is only as good as its governance strategy. It's over to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh, and thank you, Balaji, for setting up the context on where does the world is looking at from a data governance perspective. So in that, let me quickly share my screen so that everybody is aligned on that. Ashutosh, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So like Balaji pointed out, from the time of, I would say, the 2015, 16 or early 2010, organizations have been gaining or understanding the value of data. And the amount of data that we are creating now every 2 years is much faster than our ambitions, and it is much faster than the data that we've created since the birth of internet and the computers till 2010. And according to a Harvard Business Review report, approximately 3.1 trillion was the cost of poor quality data. And just building on to what you said, Ashutosh, raw data like crude oil must be refined for its value to shine brightly. So it is for an organization on how much value they can generate out of the data that they already have and ensure that it's proper quality. And that's where the data governance plays a role. But are organizations doing it? I don't think so. The organizations in today's environment, if they have to look at a wholesale data governance perspective, they need to look at it from a perspective of what are the operational excellence they want to drive with. Are you able to drive the operational excellence that you want to drive in a world without data? Are you able to deploy the capital that you have in a most effective way? Are you able to transform your organization using AI, RPA, or the blockchain? And are you innovating to outperform? So these are some of the questions that an organization or the board should be asking on deciding what data governance strategy should they be looking at. And just building further on that, what we've heard from across the industries and across the surveys that we conduct, there is a lot of data that organizations are collecting. And there are regulations which are trying to curtail on how much data can an organization collect, but the data which is being collected by the organizations is not utilized up to its potential. Businesses are still struggling with siloed data. There are multiple versions of raw data. There is no single source of truth, and there are multiple data sources that every business is struggling with. Businesses are spending more time searching for the right data and cleaning up the data which they've collected. So instead of utilizing the value out of the data, businesses are spending more time cleaning up that data, resulting into a bad data governance strategy. And the ability of an organization to leverage the historical data is pretty limited. And that's where the entire concept of data governance kicks in, wherein encompasses all the components of a people, process, technology, and ensuring that the data is trusted, available, secured, and ensure that the governance around the data is considered. It would not be wrong to say that a data governance is fundamental for maintaining good data quality, accurate and timely regulatory management. With the onset of GDPR, the accurate and timely regulatory management reporting is becoming one of the key priorities for the organizations. And in that journey, the organization should be looking at who is currently managing the data, who is currently accountable for it, who is responsible for managing the data, and how are the data quality issues being remediated. Having said that, if an organization manages to set up a good data governance framework, they would have a strong foundation for overall managing the data assets. They would be able to facilitate faster decision-making process. They would be able to decide whether the philosophy they want to be data-driven or data-informed. And most important of all, they would be able to integrate business units better across its functions. The data governance should be within the culture of the organization and should embody the discipline that organization should be taking in to ensure that people are able to make value out of data. Now, there are various components when it comes to a data governance. So whether it is the data quality, metadata, the most important of all starts with the organization defining its priorities and scope. Then looking at how would they handle change management. The other key thing which is missing in most of the organizations is the entire organization. So like you have a security organization, you have a finance organization. Organizations are still coming up with what is called as a data governance organization or something called as a data organization. So that somebody is owning that data which is getting collected and what to make out of that data. How are organizations connecting to different catalogs? How do they make sense of outers? So what are the policies that organizations would be looking at? What is the technology that need to be looked at? And most important of all, how do you sustain all that? So that is in summary, I would say the crux of data governance that organization should be looking at. And it's a combination of a business as well as the technology support. Both need to go hand in hand before an organization can have a good data governance strategy. So with this, I'll stop myself and Ashutosh, back to you.
Okay, thanks a lot for that update and for that context there, Lalit. And there's the three representatives, so to say, of financial services companies. There are insurance companies and there is a bank. So let me start with the bankers or the financial services companies. Jai Pawani, if I can come to you, if you can give how, while it is critical, that is pretty obvious that data is critical, how is it getting to be more critical for you, and how is the governance getting even more complex for you as we move along?
Sure. So look, I think the key operative word is, how is it getting more critical? Because I think data has always been critical. Because if you step back and look at what a financial services organization does, we deliver a service. We don't manufacture a widget or sell a car or manufacture a deodorant or a perfume or whatever, right? So it's a service. And how do you deliver the service? It is through data, which is the lifeline of whatever we do, right? So in that sense, it's not a new thing, but I think it's gotten all the more critical and all the more important. I think if I break it up from a governance standpoint, I would break it up into three elements. There's an element of responsibility when you collect the data of a customer, to collect only as much as you need, to store it responsibly and protect it, and use it for the purposes that you've collected it for, right? So there is a big element of protecting the data that you're collecting, because it's not your data, it is actually your customer's data that you're collecting. So you have to collect it and hold it responsibly. The second piece around it is then, how do you, I think either it was Lalit or you yourself, Ashutosh, you mentioned about if you have oil or if you have crude oil, it magically doesn't become very useful unless you can refine it, extract it at the right price point, cost point, and then deploy it in the right way. Otherwise, it is crude oil and it's a reserve. It's not yet that magic fuel that everybody is after. Similarly, the second part of the governance is around connect. So maybe a team A collects the data, but a team B wants to consume it for something else. How do you responsibly establish processes or procedures where somebody only consumes it in a responsible way and doesn't take away from the terms and conditions that you committed to a end customer, for example, right? I cannot take a supply chain data from a wholesale client, take that and create a lead out of it and go to somebody else if the supply chain partner is not allowed me to do so. So the connecting piece and the collaborating piece across the businesses is something that you have to do, again, very responsibly, in line with the regulations and the operating guidelines of the regulatory body, of the land where you operate in, and the rules vary. GDPR is quite different in the EU world. India is going to get its equivalent through the data privacy bill, hopefully by the end of this year, often referred to as IDPR loosely. So you got to follow the guidelines and the rules of the land beyond the customer commit that you've committed as well. The last piece is really the unlock. So the protection part, the connection and the collaboration part, but then to unlock the potential to do something with it, to make it that magic sauce, or that data is the new oil kind of oft used phrase. To actually do that, you need to have really good tools. You've got to manage a client life cycle. If I've collected data from you at a point in time and I know you're growing, or you started with product A, but I'm now talking to you about product 2, to make it relevant for you. Otherwise, I'm just mass bombarding you with emails or SMSs, which frankly, after a point, you get annoyed and you do a D&D or something and it doesn't even reach you. So to make the offers, to make the services relevant to the customer, I have to do a lot of mining. I have to do a lot of understanding of the data to make that client need the key. So if I'm reaching out to Ashutosh with an alternative offer or a product, it needs to be relevant to Ashutosh. So I think 3 pieces, the protect, the connect or collaborate, and the unlock, is the framework that we use in governing what we do. I hope that's useful.
Sure. Sachin, with more data being generated and more data available, again, we will get to the quality of that data in a little while. How does that help your industry in generating business? Because new products can be developed using some of the data that is being generated, and also some of the challenges that you face in the data governance issues.
Well, thanks, Ashutosh. I think that's a very relevant question. I think insurance as a sector, as in India, we are still underpenetrated. There's a lot of need for insurance for all of us to be, picking up insurance as the most important vehicle that provides a lot of protection. It does provide protection as well as, falls under the bracket of discipline, which starts with savings and investments and all of that. Now, I think the starting point is on clearly, what is the business strategy? Now, when I say business strategy, what I mean is that what are the common objectives that you would want to get to, from a consumer or a customer perspective, and how could you make solutions which are easy to, source, easy to explain, and easy to be adopted. Now, ease and simplicity is very important underlying, and I'm just trying to emphasize on the on part of ease and simplicity is purely because in our context we still do not understand insurance pretty well. While there is a lot of awareness on insurance, people still try to confuse insurance with some other alternates and initiatives as well, which is fine, which could depend from a customer to customer. But I think what data provides is a little bit more clarity to the manufacturing entities as well as to the servicing entities like ours, to be able to make and absorb a lot of data which is available into meaningful information, so that in the boardroom, when that information is being provided, then the right decisions could be taken. See, it's all about a value chain, right? It just starts from the from what the market is, from what the consumer trends are. We are dealing with a lot of millennials we are a young country, right? So a lot of millennials, will be kind of looking for insurance. How do you kind of unlock the real value of insurance and cater to various different segments of customers who may be perceiving insurance very differently is a very important question that kind of provides a feed into your objective of making insurance more easy and therefore increase the adoption amongst the market, and therefore then increasing a wider population which can be covered with insurance. So it all kind of starts with the same point that I think Jay was also making, which is on starting from the customer, making sure that the propositions are right. What is relevant from a data governance standpoint is that you need to have the right touch points. See, there's a lot of information which is available, about customers today. There are digital footprints which are available. Of course, security is most critical because data is my identity, and I would not like my identity to be compromised at all. So therefore, all respects to that data confidentiality and other things that just got spoken about. But what is also important is for the sector to move forward, to meaningfully and constructively use this data, this piece of information, making sure that you're capturing all the relevant touch points so that at the end of the day, the business strategy, the questions that the business strategy starts off with, data is able to provide that information. Last point from me, just to give you a couple of examples, as I said, from millennial standpoint, what is it that they would need? So term insurance or protection or pure protection is something which is cheaper when you buy early. Becomes more costly as you move along. Of course, if you're more healthy over others, the premiums vary. But what is important is, and very frankly, it's not about just selling insurance as a product, but probably understanding this a little better and correlating it to the lifespan of us as human beings, and making sure that you take the right decisions at the right age, and therefore make it more purposeful at the end of the day. For your family or for the dependents that you do have. So I think that's a very important use case. Similarly, we do see a lot of trend shifting from just sourcing to the importance of servicing. Now, what would a consumer want from an insurance company from a servicing standpoint? There are distinct and varied needs, distinct and varied customers looking at various set of options. So I feel from a pure data governance standpoint, touch points have to be absolutely critical. We cannot just absorb everything. I think it has to tie back to the business strategy at the end of the day. The business strategy encapsulates the customer behavior as well as, as an organization, the regulatory obligations that we would have. And the bedrock of all of this is the technology strategy. Without the tech strategy, you would not be able to address and answer some of these questions, which are still kind of bubbling up.
Right.
So that would be my view on that, Ashutosh, if that helps.
Yeah, sure. Suhail, from some of the challenges, because Sachin did mention some of the details, what are some of those typical problems that you get in terms of data governance and which need addressing urgently? And, where, if you can also give an example where technology has helped it solve for you, or you're looking for technology to solve it for you.
Hey, Ashutosh, thank you. This is a great question. I think traditionally we have looked at data in various stages. We looked at data during acquisition, we looked at data through servicing, and a lot of times the data within our industry is channel specific. Some data belongs to agents, some belongs to bank partners, and I think as we are evolving, you need to probably look at data comprehensively, and at the same point of time there has to be strict governance. Because there are certain customers, the data actually belongs to the bank. There are bank customers, right? So while you will run your models, but you want to make sure they are run at the bank premises. There's a proper consent, as Sachin said or Jay said, before you actually start using that data. So the other challenge is around how do you organize the data when when the acquisition can happen from any channel, but you are servicing it. And that how do you truly omni-channel service? So it's no longer about having a contact center where it doesn't speak to your website, doesn't speak to your WhatsApp bot. You may have had a failed transaction on a website, and then you call up the contact center. The person needs to know, right? What was it? So how do you harmonize that data? How do you get a tech strategy of creating a common data platform, a customer data platform, which can service this multiple touch points. And for a customer, it's like a hot touch point from one place to another. So I think that's a second thing. Third, I think as Sachin said, is that we are in the business of long-term relationships. We are not transactional business insurance, which means you will house the data for a very long period. Now, how do you make sure the data is secure? Even as the customer evolves, your customer is not the same. He will go get married, he will have kids, he will move to retirement. So there will be different life stages. Now, in each of the life stages, how do you make sure you keep on augmenting this data? Now, we all have banks, have relationship officers, insurance is trying to follow very similar. How do you connect with the people during their lifestyle, continue to enrich your data to make sure that you're able to tailor make, as Sachin said, probably to a 25-year-old you sell term, probably to a 50 or 45-year-old you send an annuity, which he can plan for the retirement. Now, how do you do that at various life stages? How do you know about the customer, the child? And I think that is where it becomes very important. Obviously, the fact here is data has to be clean, it has to be cross-channel, and at the same point of time, you have to make sure that the customer feels he's the owner of that data. So I think that's very important, being safe. Lastly, we have also seen how can you use this data, because as Jeff said, ultimately it has to make sense. You have to mine this. How do you give the right offer to the customer? Because bombarding everybody with a renewal message, and we all are different. Somebody likes to read his message 20 days before. Somebody says, don't bother me till the day of the payment. Now, how can you know about the customer enough to really, tailor make the solutions for this? And I think those are some of the challenges, knowing enough about the customer at the same point of time, making sure that you use it wisely.
Okay, very valid point, sir. So let's move to the pharmaceuticals industry and the pharma industry, if I may say so. Atanu, too many challenges. Again, the data of a variety of kinds you hold for a long period of time. Also, when you're going through the entire process of building a molecule or making a molecule or researching on it, what are probably one or two most unique challenges that you've come across in terms of governance and in terms of ensuring some of the security related issues?
Yeah, thanks, Ashutosh. So, important facet of pharma industry, and now drugs and vaccines are used by everybody. So, everybody needs it. So one of the important things is any pharma company needs to maintain the whole life cycle, right from the start to the finish, sourcing of ingredients to each and every step of manufacturing to the consumption. Each data point needs to be recorded so that the traceability is there and the patient safety, which is extremely important, can be tracked and ensured. And we also heard during the COVID cases, many vaccines, there were counterfeits and there were issues related to that. So for us, data maintenance, the first primary purpose is to ensure patient safety and ensure that the production process, we get the exact result, what is expected out of it. Mining the data to do other things comes later, but first is how do we ensure patient safety? And can we trace back? Can we prevent counterfeit of products? As we say it in our country and many places in the world, there are significant products and there is counterfeit which happens. And how do we trace back and ensure that that doesn't happen and patient safety is ensured is a very, very important component. So that is the very fundamental part of it. And then with the wealth of data as we are, so in earlier days, all these data was being maintained in paper. While in paper, you have your challenges in maintaining it. And the extended pharma life cycle is not only producing these drugs, but also the doctors and the prescriptions and the patient care and the health records being maintained. Now the whole life cycle is getting digitized. So it is not only the pharma manufacturing life cycle getting digitized, but also the electronic health records. All the hospitals have digitized it, and what the patients and the apps and the medicines they are taking. So everything is digitized. Now that creates a wealth of data. The whole value chain, the first and primary important thing is how are you creating the data accurate? Data integrity is the first fundamental part. The second part is how do you ensure the privacy of the data? For the manufacturing part, integrity of the data is important, so that if there is a mistake, you can trace back. But for the patient, it is the privacy of the data. If somebody has a diabetes, somebody has a cancer, that is very personal. And we don't want people to now misuse that and start selling something to them or do something else with that. So that is the other part of it. Now, having the data, now that the things are getting digitized, how do you make that shiny bit of it, which we said the analytics and all the nice words? That is where very interesting thing is coming up. I don't think a few years back, people would have done drug discovery so fast, or vaccines could have been produced so fast as it has happened now. So significant speed of drug discovery, where all these analytics models, machine learning, and bringing the science and statistics together to do things, has significantly transformed this industry, and it is transforming. And next 5 years, this industry is going to see significant amount of stuff with the science, the data analytics and robotics, all the automation coming into play. This is going to transform and make the shining bit a lot more. And the quicker drug discovery and vaccine discovery is a testimony to that. The third part, while these two things happen, is how do you ensure that the data is secure? And so you store it, but what about the ransomwares? What about somebody trying to attack you? And what if today's Serum Institute, there is a ransomware attack and it stops their operations, or it manipulates the data? So they're not only their manufacturing will stop, the whole supply chain will stop, but people would be very cautious to use it because now you don't know what to do about it. So protecting your systems and data is extremely important, and the cybersecurity becomes so very important more as you digitize your operations and generate more data.
Absolutely.
And there it leads to the other part of when you create all the data, how do you store it? How do you efficiently retrieve all the data? When you have to use it, the entire governance around that. So these are the different aspects of it. The extended part of it is clinical trial, how you handle clinical trial data in a very efficient manner as you discover more drugs. So these are the various facets in a pharma industry, and data so in pharma industry, data becomes extremely crucial because we are custodians of the data. We need to ensure that the data is accurate, that the integrity of the data is very important. Now that everything is getting digitized, we need to maintain it properly. Earlier, it was not digitized, it was in paper. And then we need to mine the data. So the entire value chain of data is itself becoming very complex, but very important.
Okay, let me go now to Kashinath Mahapatra. The GMR group, Kashinath, airports, power, so all variety. But then there is also a data there, which is also another kind of an asset. How are you seeing it?
Thanks, Ashu. The matter has already, we are in a diversified group, and data lying in many systems, multiple systems across the group. And as you see the trend now, the trend is that the enterprise applications also are moving from on-premise to the SaaS model.
Correct.
So your data is not with you. It is lying with multiple SaaS service providers. So they are very good because they are focused, and the applications are very, they are focused on their applications. So you get a lot of analytics from them. So now you have to decide how much data will live with these SaaS products, and how much data will bring to on-premise or to a centralized repository for the exploiting those data for the benefit of the strategy, for the business commercialization. So that is a decision you have to take. You cannot just replicate all the data across some 100 applications to a centralized place, say data lake like setup to explore that. So the complexity has increased because of this. Already we are in a diversified group. So we have just following a federated structure. That means the data lies with the diversified business. Plus the data has to be at the source, has to be classified. What should go to the centralized part where it can be further utilized for the making a strategy or monetization of that. So that structure we are following, we are evolving that, we are adopting, the industry is evolving. And when it is in a SaaS model or in a cloud, the security risk goes multiplied. So you have to protect your data also. Maybe you have to put CASB, some sort of security to it to protect your data also in the who is accessing this data. So all these things has to be governed. So this itself has become a coming out as a different vertical. The data lifecycle management is becoming a different vertical for that. You need a complete governance framework around that. Say people, process, technology, everything you have to put it in that. So this is making complex, but at the same time it is becoming very interesting by introduction of artificial intelligence, machine learning. So this technology also is helping to having a better insight into this data. The data was lying somewhere, we didn't know the value of that. Now this becoming a very valuable asset for the, not for the group, our group, for the everybody, it has become an asset. So there will be not, days are not far away when we have to put a value to this data. We have to do a monetization, we have to put, because unless you put a value, nobody will give importance to that. Maybe slowly the industry will start, and already, as you know, Gartner has come out with some of the models to how to put a value to all this data. So unless it is put a value, I think once the value is attached to it, the governance will definitely go up. And as Atanu told and all other told, there is ransomware. Why the ransomware is coming? Because the value of this data. If it is, there is certain value, but we are not able to express in terms of money. So maybe the industry will evolve. People will start attaching to the value to it, and the importance will go up. At the same time, whenever there is a governance issue is coming, then the data become a liability. So you are having a customer, or as Atanu told, the patient's data or insurance data. The data is an asset as well as a liability for you also. Because if something is get leaked, something is you don't protect the privacy, then the liability comes towards that. So maybe slowly industry will come up saying that, and all the acquisition recently, whatever is happening, the valuation is going up. The valuation is going up because of data. You will be finding all startups having a loss, but they are valued highly because of this data, because there is a value attached to it. So this will evolve, and people will start monetizing and expressing in terms of money. That is my, and naturally the governance will go up because you want to protect your assets. Everybody wants to protect their assets.
That raises a very interesting question now. Balaji, we've heard all the representatives here across industries. One thing is very clear. The move towards digitization, greater role for data. So in this space at which it is happening, what are some of those key points that companies should keep in mind when they are formulating their strategy, when boards are putting together some measures? What are some of those points?
Yeah, good question, Ashutosh. We heard Lalit talk about the governance model, and he laid it out very nicely in terms of a full view as to how one should have a governance strategy. And he also mentioned pieces of the organization which are missing today. While security is being treated specially with an organization, data governance still doesn't have an organization. Then we also saw like you said, the larger life cycle, which was mentioned by both Suhail and Sachin as well, in terms of coming from the insurance side, the kind of the period for which they need to retain the data, and their customer itself, the data itself is changing because the customer is buying an insurance at a particular point in time, and then as he gets married and as he evolves with his job and other things, it's completely changing all over again. And then we saw Atanu also talk about the complexity in the pharma sector, where they are talking about almost 9+ years of R&D, and then a few more years for the approval, and then a few more years to sell the product. So the long-term retention of data is actually mind-boggling. And Atanu also spoke about the digitization that is happening at a very fast pace, which also suggests that we are having to store far more data than before for a far more longer period of time, not only from a protection and a governance standpoint, but also kind of to dig into the data and come up with meaningful insights which can help the business going forward. And Mr. Mahapatra also very nicely articulated the cyber side, the cloud side, the SaaS side, complex decisions to be taken today in terms of, yeah, the cloud is there. We were outsourcing our infrastructure. We were using the cloud as infrastructure on the tap. And now we are using applications as infrastructure on the tap. Should our data be with the application service provider? Should it be on-prem? What should we do? And how do we protect this data? So I think when I look at all this, I kind of crystallize this into 4 C's. The 4 C's, the first C that comes to mind is there is a significant cost associated with the way we are storing data, with the way we are governing data and managing data going forward. I see customers, I will talk about the other 3 C's as well, but in different orders, different customers have looked at this in terms of their own priorities. Now, the cost is obviously going up because of the volume of data, the speed at which it is growing, the speed at which we are digitizing. And also the second C that I will talk about is cyber, which is something that I'm seeing in the last 12 to 18 months, especially the ransomware piece. It is keeping customers awake at night. The last thing you want as a person running the business is a ransomware attack. And we have seen that almost 72% of the respondents from India in a survey last year said they are not adequately protected for ransomware, or their security measures that they've taken has not kept pace with the speed at which they are doing digitization. So clearly there is a risk. And also it takes a minimum of 4 to 5 days and up to 16 days to recover from one such attack. Now, which business in this digital world can be waiting for anywhere between 4 to 16 days to recover from one such attack? So this is a significant risk exposure that we have on the cyber side as well. Of course, there are other things like encryption at rest, et cetera, which are regulatory stuff on the security side outside of ransomware. But ransomware comes to mind because of the current India being one of the 3 or top 5 targeted countries from a ransomware standpoint. Then, of course, cloud has brought in a plethora of benefits, and along with that, it has brought in a lot of questions also, especially on the data side. Many of us, when we double click into the cloud SLAs that we have, we see that it's very often infrastructure uptimes, or if it's a SaaS vendor, it's an application uptime. But what about the data? What about the data privacy? What about the data governance and security? Those fine prints are usually not read as equally as the SLAs are read, because finally our number one SLA is application uptime, and that's what we all focus towards. But when one reads into this, one realizes that what should be the strategy? Should we have point products from the cloud vendor? Should we have point products from the SaaS vendor? What should we have? And then when you have these point products, when you have a challenge and you need data recovery, like Atanu also mentioned about the fact that this data needs to be recovered when required quickly, we get a lot of requests from banks saying 2012 data is required, 2016 data is required. And that data is typically from the regulator. It's RBI asking for it, or in the case of telco, it's TRICE. I'm sure in the pharma industry, there is a lot more of that being asked for. So the challenge is, how do you recover that data, and what kind of SLA do you have with your service provider if he's on the cloud? Or is it better to keep one copy of data on the premise and let the cloud service provider actually run it, so that there is no risk associated and you can produce that data to the regulator or to the business as the case may demand? And the last C, of course, is the compliance piece, which we have been speaking about. There is the state compliance, the GDPR kind of regulations that are in place, which we need to follow. Stringent fines if we don't adhere to those regulations in terms of how we protect the data and how we ensure the privacy norms are taken care of. So I think if you see the common themes, it revolves around the 4 C's, whether it is security, cost, cloud, or compliance, in any which order, as the case may be for different customers. And probably a good solution to all this is to have a data platform. I think it was Sachin or Suhail who mentioned that having a platform for data So similarly have a platform for data protection, data governance as well, which kind of marries into the strategy that Lalit Kalra was talking about, where you look at the platform from a scalability standpoint, from a performance standpoint, from an API integration standpoint, where it integrates with your current organizational tools so that you don't have a standalone piece that you're creating. And this data accurately populates around the DevOps or the dashboards that you have, which shows you the health and quality of data that you have. So this will also not only give you the protection piece, it will also tell you how much of your data is being used today. Suppose you're hoarding data, like you have 70% of the data that has not been touched for 10 years. Do you want to spend a lot of money on that data? Today, as you're going to the cloud and paying a bill every month, you're paying for that data storage too, which is not untouched for the last 10 years. So tools and technologies today available to throw light into the data and tell you this is what we call as dark data, untouched for 5-10 years. Take a call as business, whether you want to retain the data or not retain the data, whether you want to pay monthly for expensive storage systems, cloud, etc. for that data. So when you clean this up, probably then we get to that data, which like most of our eminent panelists said, the useful data, the beyond. So this is the data you need to mine for that business purpose. Today, as I speak, in my last 6 years, there's hardly an organization that says we delete data. Nobody deletes data. I rarely see that happen. I would be happy to be challenged and I would be happy to be proved wrong, but we hoard a lot of data and we are paying a huge price for this. So instead, if you're able to kind of fragment this, put those data which is untouched into low cost systems somewhere and keep that rich data, which is the useful data, current valid data in high systems or in systems which are very powerful where multiple people can access, which again goes back to the collaborate point that Jay Pawani brought in, and you can unlock the value of that data and provide value. So over to you, Ashutosh.
Okay. Lalit, if I can. So one of the other things that was heard from several people was also about the security aspect, the ransomware threat and all that. What are you hearing as you speak to companies across the country in terms of the kind of preparedness as well as the kind of threats that they face, or there has been an incident?
Thank you, Ashutosh. I think Balaji has covered to an extent about ransomware. Just an interesting fact on ransomware, Ashutosh. There are countries in the world where 1/3 of their GDP comes only from ransomware money extortions that they collect.
Yeah, that's not funny.
Yeah, I know. And that's the extent of the amount of money which is paid when it comes to ransomware. That's the extent to which organizations are getting attacked on a daily basis. So we talked about India being in the top 3 countries from a ransomware perspective where ransomware attacks are happening. But are organizations aware about the attacks that might happen? Yes, they are aware. Are they taking steps to ensure that they are protected? Yes, they are taking steps. But is it enough? The answer is may or may not be. Because one of the easiest mode that hackers today are using is the phishing channel, wherein they are relying, and this is in multiple surveys that we'll go through. Phishing comes as the top threats that people or hackers across the world are using to attack an organization, and which is where the challenge brings. And there are email security solutions. So Mr. Mahapatra talked about CASB. So similarly, there are email security solutions which organizations are implementing, but the hackers are getting smart day by day. So unless an employee is able to differentiate between a link which is coming from a source which is reliable versus a link which is coming from a hacker, the organization will always be on the brink of getting attacked one way or the other. The organizations are taking steps, so they are moving to cloud to an extent save them the fact that the backup data which is implemented or backup data which is taking is safe. But some of the steps that organizations are taking nowadays, and that's a trend that we see, Ashutosh, a lot of organizations are going for assessing their preparedness against ransomware. They are conducting, I would say, the war games, which are not only limited to tabletop, but is something what we call as the incident effectiveness exercise across the board and with people across the organizations, wherein they simulate a scenario of a ransomware and they say how would the people react, because it is not about how much do you know about acting, it's about how quickly you can react in if you're hit by a ransomware. And also there are multiple trainings that they are undertaking for the teams on how to identify a phishing email. Multiple phishing simulations are being conducted. At the same time, like a lot of other panelists talked about, the regulations are also ensuring that people put a check on the controls that they're implementing. There is a very thin line between an organization being able to deliver or generate value out of data, at the same time being able to misuse the data. So Balaji said 6 years. I would be more than happy to extend it to 16 years of my career. Have not seen any organizations which say we delete data. We created frameworks for the organization, but those frameworks are not implemented on ground for retention. The data is always there. There is no, it's just getting dumped everywhere. And we've seen exercises with organizations, Ashutosh, wherein there would be full-on servers which would be left in the network which are not used. And when we do a data discovery, we identified the server, and the CIO and the CISO sometimes are surprised. So this was created for a dev environment and was left. Nobody decommissioned it.
Yeah.
There are multiple scenarios and the controls that organizations are putting in, but it's always to have a good governance strategy and ensuring that the people and the culture of, I would say, security that needs to be followed.
Sure. So let's also get, so some of the issues that I also want to cover is the India regulation, the data regulation that is expected, and also about some of the analytics part of it. Atanu, you mentioned that the industry is on the cusp of a change. So how is analytics going to change the industry? How is, the sheer volume and the reliability of data going to change that?
Let me take from the complete value chain. So starting from the drug discovery. So there is the data within the organization and there is public data. So public data of health and various genomes and all. So analytics can significantly help on the drug discovery side, something which we have not even thought of. So a lot of artificial experimentations can get done, which will help discover drugs faster. So that is on the R&D side. And coming to the manufacturing, we are expecting significant yield improvement in manufacturing. So using the same capacity, and we saw the benefits of it in month of March. The demand forecast for one of our products, trastuzumab, which was used in COVID for at the one stage cytokine storm when it was setting up. It was 200 vials a week, and then in April it was 7,000 vials a week. So from 200 to 7,000. So you don't have the capacity to do it. So you can only do it through yield improvement, and that is there is significant yield improvement which can happen through advanced analytics using the data properly. So that is on the manufacturing side. Yield improvement, operational efficiency improvement can be exponential. And then the third part is patient connect. So digital therapeutics, which is going to help doctors supplement the doctors in improving the patient condition. Somebody has a diabetes, needs insulin treatment. Insulin is given today as a, it might be given as a rough estimate, but can you personalize the medicines? And that is where analytics will play an important role. Somebody who has a nervous condition or a central nervous system, they're again personalizing the dosage of medicines is going to help. So if you look at the complete value chain, analytics is playing an important role, where data and plethora of sensors which are there. So what was things which was not there earlier was we could not capture data. Now we have sensors which are able to capture everything, not only the Apple watches which captures your body parameters, but in the whole value chain, data is getting captured every moment, and that helps to do this analytics much better. On the energy saving part, we are able to save energy in the factories significantly just by doing analytics. because we know exactly how much of various parameters are getting used, not used, and can monitor and fine tune the whole operations. So I see analytics in the next 3 years is going to transform the entire pharmaceutical and healthcare segment from drug discovery, efficient manufacturing, and better, more effective healthcare for patients.
Okay, so Jai Pawani, the law regarding India's privacy and data protection bill that's coming, how does that change how you've been doing business so far?
Sure. So, but if I may, Ashutosh, if I can just go back to the security point that Lalit was talking about, I think we've increasingly focused on just ransomware. I just wanted to put out there are other cybersecurity concerns as well. You know, you've got geopolitical threat actors who probably not looking at money, but have other reasons. And, you know, through denial of service attacks, you also have reputational risks to the firm. So there are other kinds of cybersecurity concerns as well, not just ransomware. And these are equally important in many cases. So I just wanted to sort of add to that cyber piece. Coming back to your question on what is often touted as IDPR or the Indian Data Privacy Bill. The bill's been in draft stage for a little more than 2 years now. You know, at the back of the Justice Sri Krishna Commission that was there, they produced a draft bill. It's been socialized with various, and it is across industries. So it's not just the banking industry. It affects the pharma industry, for example. So it's across the board. The bill will significantly change the way perhaps we put value to data as you know, I think it was Kashi who was talking about it. It addresses one of the things that Balaji and Lalit both vehemently talked about, which is how long I keep data that I collect. The bill talks about destruction of data. And if you hold data beyond destruction periods, one will be liable. It talks about how responsibly you collect data. So the kinds of terms and conditions that you would have to disclose to the customer, how clearly you would have to do it, and those kind of things. So it's got about 7 or 8 sort of building blocks on what the bill would do. They have taken a lot of inputs from various people in the industry on this, including sort of advocacy bodies across the industry on it. The latest is perhaps it'll get passed in this winter session of the parliament. And I think there are 3 more steps to it. Once the bill gets passed, they've talked about a data protection authority, which would then be the governing body to administer the actual sort of implementation of the bill, right? And the big question that also stands out is whether the data protection authority would be a pan sort of industry one, or would they in turn have a high level coverage, but let the likes of RBI or, you know, IRD for insurance and TRI for telecoms be the sector specific regulators to dictate the specifics. The other very important part the bill talks about is it classifies data. And by the way, the bill addresses only primarily on PII data, which is personally identifiable information, which is private data, if you put it that way. There's a non-PII draft bill, which is at a super early stage, which came out earlier this year. But on the PII data, they would further classify it into 3 buckets: critical, sensitive, and critical and sensitive. And for each of these categories, there would be very specific requirements that perhaps either the DPA or the industry-specific regulators would then ask us as, you know, players in the industry to follow. And you know, that's broadly what it will do. I think from an impact perspective, I think it's great for customers. You know, it makes it very transparent and ensures that there is adequate governance and regulation around it. From an industry perspective, I think it's also great because, you know, sometimes today we do get caught out between archaic laws and conflicting or competing laws across different authorities. And I do think the bill will bring some consistency across the interpretation of some of these things. And, you know, my last point on it, sorry, it's a longish answer, but the recently RBI from 2018 put out a specific requirement around domestic payments data storage only in the shores of India, not cross-border, but domestic. And if that gives us a prelude, if you like, a trailer for what's likely to come in the guise of the data privacy bill. That's specific to payments data and domestic payments data in the banking sector. And going by that, I think we have a good sense of, or if you take the Aadhaar protection bill and how you have to store Aadhaar numbers in a data vault and only use tokenized values for consumption outside. I think these are good samples or examples of what's in store when IDPR comes into existence.
Suhail, in terms of the insurance sector, so some of the points that Jay mentioned about the tokenized way of using the data, how does that make it a challenge for you in terms of governance of the data in the years ahead? What can you foresee?
I think, as whatever Jay mentioned, I think that applies even back to the insurance sector also. A couple of more things. The good part is that we are now digitizing the entire thing. The one challenge earlier used to be that wherever there were manual forms, people used to write things like Aadhaar numbers and everything else. And how do you make sure you are able to, encrypt all this data, you anonymize all of this, mask all of it? I think that was the one big challenge. And as data is becoming more and more digital, I think that's becoming easier. I think second thing, what we looked for from a very similar, what Jay was saying, one thing was always about, getting access to use the data. Now, I think the new the IDPR bill also says ability to withdraw access, which means that when we build our applications, we build customer this thing, and when a customer says withdrawing my access, you have to go back and withdraw from every system, every data platform, that data. And I think that will be a big challenge, what I see. I think the way our traditional systems have been built, whether it's banks, insurance companies, they haven't been built from that access, because we store data, we use it, and then we may anonymize it, we may use it for data models. Now, how do you take it back from every place? When a customer says, I'm no longer going to, I'm withdrawing my consent. I think those that's a different kind of challenge. I know the bill is not out, but there is one of these one of these policies there. The other thing also would be more and more, you will have to also figure this out, especially for the banks who work with multiple third parties, whether it's insurance companies, it is mutual funds. A lot of time you run models on the bank's data, not obviously the data, because to create pre-approved offers, which you can tailor make to your customers. I think more and more, as you get into this world of consent, you have to make sure where you can use this data. Can you use this data? Now, although there are places and safeguards in place that before you use it, there's a consent, customer allows you to do that. But you have to really think, how will you even use some of the data for own customers' benefit if you really wants to do it? Because you are assuming now certain things. And I think that's a kind of a challenge. I think lastly, from data security point of view, as we said, as you store data for the insurance company for them 20 years, 30 years, whole life policies, which you are actually, it's eligible till the time you live. You really have to think through how will you keep on, make sure the data remains very secure. If someone once only given you consent for one task, this has to be with you for all the life of the customer. It can be 20 years, 40 years. You may change your models, but you still show that this customer only give you consent to share data for this reason. And I think that will become more and more challenging. How do you build this in your, in the way you design application, the way you design your AI models, that, this customer has said only use data for an X reason. And therefore, for Y reason, this should not come up. And I think those are some of the challenges we all will work through as we look at data protection in the longer run.
Okay. So Balaji, if you can give a brief answer, what should be some key pillars for a good, I know it's a very broad question, of good data governance policy? What should be those 4 or 5 pointers, or maybe something like that?
Yeah, I think from my practical experience, I would say one of the first things that one needs to do is relook, given the amount of transformation that is happening, relook at the data architecture and the way we are storing data, retrieving data, and securing data, especially with a lot of recent changes around the cloud around the way you are using SaaS applications, etc. There is a lot of back office IT happening. There's a lot of shadow IT happening. Which requires one to really rethink the architecture behind how do you govern the data itself. Second thing is in terms of, like I spoke before on the platform, do we have one single platform? Point products are, I would say, a big no-no. A, it increases the cost. B, it increases complexity. C, when really, as we say, shit happens, we don't want to go to 5 different products to get that same data. That hour of reckoning, we want it to be available, and we want it to be on the tap. So relook at the architecture, relook at the platform. We need to be obviously scalable, given the fact that data is growing, and it is going to be 10x in the next 6 to 7 years for sure. So it needs to be extremely scalable. And we also need to, very importantly, look at supportability for future workloads. We have Kubernetes coming in, we have a lot of OpenStack coming in. So a lot of this adoption is going to happen in due course of time. It's just not going to be a VMware and Azure and AWS as you're seeing today. It's going to be much more. On an average, there are 6 cloud service providers that Indian customers use, which as per the US norms is not big enough. There could be more. So there is an increasing amount of complexity there. So that is why I referred to the relook at the architecture, and because of this constant change, relook at the platform, have a single platform strategy where everything can be tied into that platform rather than multiple different products that you want to go towards. And the last but the final piece is a proper DR strategy for your data. It's very critical that if something happens, like for me, when I tell customers a basic is a 3 copy, but if you can have a DR which is solid, I think even if you have ransomware or other cyber threats, as Jay said, it's not just ransomware, it's much more. The ability to go to that site and bring that data back and keep your business running at that critical hour is very important. So I would say these are the few things that come to mind as you ask this question. Thank you.
Sachin, this the disaster recovery point that Balaji mentioned, that's critical, and also for an industry like insurance, where, as we discussed earlier, very long-term data that you've scored, and it needs to live through some of the emerging technologies as well.
Yeah, so that's right. In fact, I couldn't agree with Balaji more. On the disaster recovery side, one is, of course, what the regulator is suggesting and what we need to do. Of course, the second part is what we think is going to be absolutely right on top of the regulations. Regulations are bare minimum. I think what is important is what is right from a customer as well as from an organization standpoint. These DR capabilities are extremely critical, and I think from a consumer perspective, when the consumer is interacting with any organization, the ecosystem that the consumer expects has to be pretty much the same, right? So if you're kind of interacting with an insurance company, or with a bank, or with a food chain company, or online shopping, if you're doing, everyone expects availability of data. So DR does become extremely critical, and of course, from a financial sector perspective, all the more critical that when there is a crisis or when there is an issue, you must have invested. One is that you should be able to foresee that and simulate that scenario in the boardroom. That's extremely important, and rehearse it over a period of time. The second is the architecture. I think the architecture is the core component or the building block for any kind of data to kind of take a form and shape, and therefore DR becomes critical from an insurance standpoint as well. The RTOs and the RPOs are pretty stringent now to what these were, a couple of years or, a decade back. We were not building our solutions from a DR perspective, a decade back, but now, DR is an important component, and some of the cloud adoptions or the SaaS platforms that I think Balaji also mentioned do provide you those kind of capabilities. But I think what's going to be important, Ashutosh, from my side is that, try to maintain that homogeneity, because there are too many solutions which are available in the market. And of course, cost becomes important, your level of perception to the risk, because you're dealing with various different kind of setups and ecosystems is very different to you trying to, have one homogeneous layer that kind of interacts with a lot of ecosystems. So what's going to be very important is how do we kind of now build the architecture from where it is to have the DR thinking done right up front. And also from a long-term perspective, I think one of the panelists did mention, and something that we are also recursively thinking, is to differentiate data basis its usage. So for example, a data which has not been used for the last 10 years, probably, from a cost perspective, needs to be compartmentalized and put somewhere else, as against to data which is probably in heavy use, and somewhere you could probably rely on more intense replication technologies, as against to something where a conventional technology of storing data may work. So I think from a DR perspective, just to kind of summarize and give you a very short answer, architecture does hold the key. Homogeneity in the architecture does provide and is an important element. And from a DR perspective, the thinking, now, of course, from a regulation standpoint or from a customer standpoint, very important to make those investments and the decisions whether to be on-prem or whether to be on cloud, and whether you're on cloud, whether does it give you a secure environment to a highly available environment, are very important decision-making factors than what these were, 10, 15 years back, to what Suhail mentioned, that when we were designing the organization, probably, in the last 15 years, the thought process is kind of changing. And hence very important that we kind of keep it more relevant to the times that we are in. And insurance, is definitely a long-term business, right? So change management for us becomes very critical. So bringing in a change now and to be able to hold out to the promises that we're making to the customer that we will deliver, 20, 25 years down the line, makes it all the more relevant for us. So I hope that kind of addresses your question, but then very important one, and Balaji couldn't agree with you more on the architecture bit.
Okay, so some interesting points there we made. Suhail, since that promise has been made, do you think companies and particularly companies, so insurance companies are like yours, would be there in the long term for sure, but the companies which are relatively smaller, they need to look at architecture which is future ready and possibly invest more today? How would you suggest people who are following you, how would you suggest them to go about it?
So I think, as Sachin said, look, today, thanks to all the innovation, if you are a young company or if you are starting now, life is far easier. You're not saddled with a legacy. You can build things directly on much flexible infrastructure. As Sachin said, cloud can be part of your conversation. As you think about cloud, your data platforms, your things like your DR are all inbuilt in today. And this is not different conversation. So today, when you take infrastructure, it comes all inclusive. You think once, you think network, you think cloud, you think security, you think DR, and you think a long-term platform. You may look at Dockers to say I'm cloud agnostic or a platform agnostic. So you do it together. So if you're a new company, my whole thing is it is far easier. The only thing is your thinking has to be comprehensive. It cannot be in parts. Secondly, a lot of people may feel it's very good to maybe have multi-cloud, to have competition. But if you are a small organization, homogeneous infrastructure helps you cut down your cost, helps you get talent. The serviceability becomes far easier. So before you really become very heterogeneous, you'll have to think about your scale. You'll have to long-term cost associated with the heterogeneous segment. I think the third one is that it is no longer about having data. You're constantly able to discover data. So we spoke about whether it's AI, ML, anything. How can you use this data? I think that becomes very important. Then next is how do you enrich the data? What are your other processes, your customer contacts you to do this? And finally, how will you make sure that data remains secure? So whether you have encryption, Aadhaar masking, there are multiple ways to it. And therefore, in the end of the whole thing comes your ability to be of a resilient organization. How can you get in case of an issue? The bigger problem is that is as companies build hybrid infrastructure, on-prem, half cloud, that is where the complexity comes in. So in my terms, it is far easier for younger organizations setting now to set this up and do it in the right way. The only thing they have to think holistically as they take their infrastructure and the application decisions.
Okay, that's another interesting point. Atanu, some of the data that is coming, also being integrated with the whole system, is being created outside of the system, outside the formal system. How do you ensure its trustworthiness and also some of the issues relating to its governance?
So data quality, there is no magic pill to this. Each data, it is like horses for courses. So the source of the data, whether it is trustworthy, how to ensure this, it has to be treated on its own merit. So when we take external data, or we take data even when internally from the organization, but it is a new source of data or a past data which is getting taken, which was not digitized earlier, the integrity or the quality of the data is a suspect, and there has to be processes put in place which needs to get reviewed and very intelligently put in place to ensure the authenticity of the data. And there are tools also now created. In fact, AI/ML is being used to know whether the data looks correct or doesn't look correct, and does it make sense or not. So that is an important aspect, especially in pharma, where we also take data for drug discovery, also external data sources. We are taking patient data to do real world clinical trials. Earlier days, clinical trials was before the launch of the product, but after the product is launched, today we keep taking data from patients so that we can continuously improve the efficacy of the product. So for real world clinical evidence, the authenticity of the data we are getting from hospitals and patients become very important, and taking data from source is very, very crucial. I think to a large extent, it depends on the source of the data we are talking about, and mechanisms has to be put, and constantly it needs to get reviewed whether we are having the right governance mechanism for ascertaining that the data quality is good. But that is the fundamental. If we don't get good quality data, all the things, castles we build on top of it becomes useless.
Okay, I would probably give a cricket parallel to it. Whenever the good batsmen, they play in the V, as they say it in cricket. So perhaps that's what Atanu is referring to. Kashinath, I'd like to come to you next. How do you make an effort, and more so it applies to you, I'd imagine, because you're such a diversified business across so many industries, to ensure continuous upgradation of the quality of the governance of that data?
So, Ashutosh, I should thanks my fellow panelists to bring the different aspects of this governance. And one of the point is the destruction of data, where we are very poor. Because, it comes from our tradition, Indian tradition. We don't destroy, so we are very attached to the things. And similarly, we are attached to this data also. So one of the practice we have to do it, that like in our tradition is that yearly once we clean our house, destroy the things which is not useful. Maybe we have to put in the governance part, the part of this destruction, a review mechanism where, and I think Sachin told, Lalit told, we have to put it to if you are not able to destroy also, put it in a offline, very low cost data storage, which ultimately it will die. You leave it to die. You are very attached to that data, not to take a decision that you are immediately going to destroy that data. So that should be part of the governance part of it. It is a very essential part of the governance of the data. And second part of that, before I go further, there was something called the compliance statutory part of it there, where we thought of that there is an obligation on our part to maintain certain things. But maybe you must be aware of late, of so many years, last so many years, we are very, very happy to file our income tax return online, everything online. We need not go to the income tax office, we need not fill up the returns, everything. So similar thing is being called off now, is faceless taxation, where the taxation authorities for corporates also will be completely digital. So if you are having a good data, you have a good supporting documents, the life will be much easier for the assessment, which is people think that you have to go multiple times to the office to explain to the officer. That thing will go away. So from that positive part of it, that more than a burden, this will help us to go to having a good data and proper data, and the compliance part will be much easier. So I feel a positive part of that when it comes to the having a good data and good data governance.
Jay, if I could, sorry,
Yeah.
do you want to add something more?
No, I
On the point on governance, I think one
Jay?
thing that, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. You wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just want to add one point on the governance part, which is increasingly, especially at least from a banking standpoint, having a designated officer who's called a chief data officer is a norm in most of the countries outside of India. And IDPR will also mandate that, a lot of banks already have this, I know for a fact, in India. And then, just like how you have a dedicated compliance person, you have a dedicated CISO for cybersecurity. I think increasingly for data governance and data oversight and policies, this is being mandated, and IDPR will mandate it across the board. So it's just a matter of time before that happens.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask, Lalit, if you can add that, this continuous improvement in the quality of governance of data, and if you can keep your answer brief, what are some of the challenges that some of the large and relatively smaller companies face?
Okay, thank you, Ashutosh. I think the quality of data is one aspect that a lot of organizations today are struggling with. Traditionally, everybody has been focusing on collecting data. But right now, once they've collected huge amount of data, organizations are realizing they are not able to make sense out of it. So the first challenge that organizations are facing is the data is in silos. It is not in one place where a one-time cleanup activity can be undertaken. And that's across large organizations. So they are going towards setting up data lakes, data warehouses, which act as single source of truths. The challenge with the smaller scale organizations, I would say the startups, is their aim is to collect as much data as possible. They are right now not concerned about quality. They want to collect as much data as possible from any number of sources. The advantage that the smaller scalers, they have the infrastructure available with them, and they're already going the data lake and the data warehouse wise. So data is in one place which is getting stored. So the cleanup for them would be easier. And at any point in time, whenever they want to clean up, it'll be easier for them. Having single source of truth from a data perspective is one key challenge. The other challenge which organizations like Jay pointed out, IDPR will also help in that. There is no one who is actually owning the data. There is no accountability of the data across larger as well as smaller scale organizations. Unless you have someone who is responsible for managing your data, you would not be able to have a good data governance in place. So these are the two key challenges which most of the organizations are facing, Ashutosh.
Okay, thank you. So we've almost run out of time. So there have been some very interesting issues raised, and I particularly the number of times we heard security, that also gives you an idea of how important it is. And again, as it was pointed out, that it's not just about the ransomware. There are other issues as well. Jay mentioned about it, and it's not just related to your tech infrastructure. It could be a whole lot of other things as well, as which disrupts that. Time for me to request Balaji for his closing remarks. If you can just go ahead, Balaji.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I think as I summed it up in my conversation, I think it is eminent panelists here, rich depth of experience. I think from Jay bringing in the side of the IDPR bill and his views around that, to practical on-ground and industry experiences from the insurance side, and from Suhail and from Sachin as well, and also the pharma experience from Atanu again, also talking about how do we scale and the challenges of scaling, especially when a drug is having 700 vials a week to 7,000 vials a week sometime later. And how do we use data and analytics to actually help scale that? I think not only have insights been brought into the infrastructure side, into the security side, into the data management side, I think also into the business side as well. And Mr. Mahapatra also rightly brought in the new age cloud and SaaS and the complexity in and around that. So I think exceptional panel. Thank you everyone for taking time out, and thank you, Ashutosh. You've been a fantastic moderator, making sure all of us have a point of view to present and also connecting the dots. So thank you everyone once again. Thanks, Ashutosh.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and for that interesting conversation. And look forward to many more conversations like that. You're most welcome for some of your comments, and of course, some of the views that you heard from the experts. You may want to tweet it or put it on your social handles. More than welcome. And do let us know what all you'd like to bring us as we discuss whole lot of aspects, different aspects about businesses. Thanks so much for watching.